Hello there. Brilliant. This is me here in Oxford. I hope you can hear and see me as clearly as I could hear and see Kate. Thanks very much for her introduction. Just while we wait for any last-minute people to join the session, I was noticing that we've got participants today from Russia, Argentina, Hungary, Mexico, Australia, Ukraine, Canada, Peru, India, Italy, Portugal. Have I missed any countries? Is there anybody else out there? I'm sure there must be. Is there anybody else? Write in the chat box. We've got Spain, Brazil, Germany, welcome. Croatia, Hrvatska, wonderful. Okay, Romania, Japan, Czech Republic, oh, and England, a few locals, splendid. Okay, good. Okay, so and someone from Shanghai, lovely. I wonder what time it is there. And Thailand, fantastic. Good stuff. Okay. Right. So, let's start today's session. As you know, it's about published resources versus teaching unplugged, and the subheading, if you like, is integrating published resources creatively and effectively to sustain motivation in teachers and students. So a tall order, but I'll do my best to deliver. In terms of how long we've got, the whole webinar experience lasts 90 minutes. Once the administration is taken out of the equation, we have about 70 minutes to play with. Okay, so 70 minutes to transform your teaching. We'll see how possible that is. Okay, so first of all, I'd like you to focus on the slide and just type in the chat box what you think these groups of letters refer to. Okay, Roland, very quick off the mark. Cities, yes, not quite. Helena, yeah, very quick, yeah. Okay, they're not resources, strangely enough. Okay, yeah, they are airports. They're airport codes. Okay, and in the center you can see our own very dear London Heathrow. Okay, which is pretty much the nearest international airport to where I am at the moment, which is Oxford. And grouped around London Heathrow, you can see there are other airports signified by their codes. Can you guess what these refer to? What does DUB refer to? Just type in the chat box if you think you know. Correct, yeah. Dublin, okay. Good, Natalia, well done. Good, great, Dublin. Some of you capitalizing as well, goodness me. Okay, and then what's to the northwest of London Heathrow? GLA, what's that? Super, Radka, yeah, good, okay. Yeah, some people still coming in with Dublin, good, okay. Super, Christina, yeah, good, okay. Yeah, probably Glasgow, yeah, Glasgow it is, yeah, good, okay. And what's next to Glasgow? What's north of London Heathrow? Absolutely, that's Chu, yeah, that's Newcastle. Yeah, okay, good. Various spellings of Newcastle there, lovely. Some of you making it to Newcastle. Good, okay. So those are, if you like, British or UK, larger UK airports. In terms of the other letters, they are AMS, which is Amsterdam Schiphol, and BRU, which is Brussels. And what about CDG? What does that stand for? That's a mystery one. Absolutely, Eleonora. Yeah, very good, Helen. Yeah, yeah, it's Charles de Gaulle. Yeah, it's Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. Okay. So what we have is we have 6 airports which are geographically arranged around London Heathrow. Okay. Now, interestingly, all of these airports, except one, is reachable from London Heathrow in 70 minutes, that's how long we have in our webinar, 70 minutes or less. Okay, so all of them, bar one, is reachable in 70 minutes or less. Now, if you think the odd one out, the one that takes longer, is Charles de Gaulle, can you raise your hand? Use the hands up icon. If you think it's Charles de Gaulle, use your hands up icon. Okay. So quite a few of you there. What about if you think it takes longer than 70 minutes to get from London to Brussels? Use the hands up icon. Okay. Good. Okay. Fantastic. Irina's just joined us from Belarus. That takes a lot longer than 70 minutes. Okay. Brilliant. So I think maybe more of you for Brussels. What about Amsterdam? What about if you think it takes longer than 70 minutes to get to Amsterdam from London Heathrow? Okay. Interesting. Okay. So not so many that time. So you think Amsterdam is closer. Okay. Now, of the three we've got left, they are all mostly UK or British airports. Raise your hands if you think it's Dublin that takes longer than 70 minutes from London Heathrow. Okay. So not many of you convinced there. Okay, you know your geography. Okay. What about Newcastle? What about if you think it takes longer than 70 minutes to fly from London Heathrow to Newcastle? Interesting. Christina's asking a question about time zone step over. Good question. Yeah, I'm just thinking about pure journey time. Okay, fine. So not that many for Newcastle. What about Glasgow? If you think it takes the longest to fly to Glasgow, over 70 minutes. So not many at all there. Okay. Now, interestingly, the one it takes longest to reach, and I know because I did it last week to give a presentation, is Glasgow. Okay. If you want to fly to Glasgow from London Heathrow, you need 1 hour 22 minutes, so about 82 minutes. Okay. So mainland Europe, Amsterdam, Brussels, Paris, are a lot closer. Okay, than Glasgow, at least geographically. Okay, we've got an interesting point there about how long it takes to walk from your plane to the exit in Brussels. Okay, maybe they should introduce some moving walkways. Anyway, so 70 minutes, not long, but long enough to travel some distance, I'm hoping. Okay, brilliant. So that's your warmer, so let's move on. It's always nice to get an indication of teaching experience of the participants, and I'm sure there's masses out there. So this is where I'd like to ask you to vote, okay? So this is about how many years you've been teaching English language. If it's 0 to 5, vote A. If it's 5 to 10, vote B. 10 to 15, vote C. And 15 to 20 plus, vote D. So if it's 25 or 30, vote D. Okay? Please try to use the voting button, the polling button, which is indicated at the top of above your chat box. And at some point, I think Kate will publish the results. Still a few votes coming in unconventionally by people typing, but that's okay. I'll have a quick look at those now. Okay, those are the results. Thanks, Kate. So we've got most people in this selection seem to be in the 5 to 10 years bracket. Okay, so not many relative novices in A, and a fair few old, experienced hands, let's say, in category D. Okay, I myself am in category D, or perhaps even category E, so it's nice to get an impression. I do hope there will be something in the webinar today for everybody, irrespective of how long they've been teaching. Okay? Good. So, apologies for the misprint in the title. It should be webinar with an R, but there you go. That's what happens when you type quickly. These are the topics we'll be looking at today. So I'll just give you 2 seconds to skim down the list. Some of them might not mean that much at the moment, but don't worry too much. This is an important one when we get to it, and I think also probably this one is the most important. Okay, so make sure you are awake for that part of the webinar. Okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, fine. So just before we start proper, can I check about how you're feeling generally today? So from the emoticon list, choose a face or a symbol for how you feel. You can be smiley or laughing or possibly confused. Let's get an impression. Okay, we've got quite a few smilers. Okay, quite a few smilers. Crikey, you're a happy bunch, I'll give you that. I want to take what you're taking. Okay, someone's winking, that's Ian. Obviously a smart guy. Okay, good. So everyone seems pretty happy. I can't see any blue faces indicating confusion, so Gulbin has just arrived late. Go to the back of the class, Gulbin. My guess is you're from Turkey, maybe? Interesting from the name. You can perhaps confirm. Okay, and someone's sticking their thumb up. Splendid, Gulbin. Okay, great, welcome. You haven't missed anything of major importance, just a few fun and games. Brilliant. Okie dokie. So let's move on. So this is the first thing we're going to look at, your desert island course book. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of a desert island something. There you are, washed up on a desert island, all alone in the baking hot sun, with only half a dozen palm trees as company, and you pass your days however you can. And then suddenly, out of the blue, somebody else washes up on the desert island. And would you believe it? It is an English language student. Okay? You're a teacher, they're a student. It's just the two of you forever locked in a terrifying lesson. Okay? Now, they managed to save one thing from the sinking boat they were on, and it was an English language course book. Okay, now what do you hope it was? What title do you hope the English language course book was? A published book. Okay, type the name in the chat box. Okay, got a few English file fans out there. Okay, Headway, can't beat Headway. Oh, someone's going for hedging their bets, going for an option. There's an IELTS person out there. Oh, there's a business teacher out there. Someone's after network. That's probably someone in the States, I guess. Okay. Business results. It doesn't have to be just OUP books. You can cast the net wider. Goodness me. Is nobody into Speak Out or Cutting Edge or Total English or Survival English? Very good. That's useful for a desert island. Okay. Yes, CUP. Yours was CUP, Helen. Thank you. I should work in publishing. Okay. Cutting Edge. Brilliant. Okay. So quite a few big hitters, quite a few favorites there. But the funny thing is about a course book, about a single course book, is that these days it doesn't really exist as a single course book. Yes, it's a published student's book, for example, but as we know these days, resources are so multimodal, they are so integrated, that in order to teach effectively, you sort of feel that you have to have the full package. You have to have the student book, the iTools, you have to have the online practice, the workbook, maybe the online workbook, the teacher's book, interleaved, the placement test, etc., 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 and so it goes. And the problem, in a sense, I would argue is not so much, where do you start with choosing your published resources, but where do you stop these days? Okay. Now, I'm not saying throw the course book away, but I am saying we need to sort of renegotiate on a fairly continual basis our relationship with published resources. Okay. And hopefully I'll provide a sort of way into that today. So, up next, what does teaching unplugged really mean? Well, it's a good question, and I won't ask you to write your answers. I'll help you out there. As you probably know, Teaching Unplugged was an ELT movement which began sort of turn of the century, around the year 2000, initiated primarily by Luke Meddings and Scott Thornbury, two well-known luminaries of the ELT world, in a discussion forum. And they argue that Teaching Unplugged advocates a move away from a dependency on materials, aids, and technology, wow, and to work with nothing more than the raw materials provided by people in the room. Okay, so a move away from a dependency on resources and to work with nothing more than the raw materials provided by people in the room. Now, for most people that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Imagine not having anything to rely on apart from your basic resources of what you have in the room or what your students can give you. And the idea of not using any technology, well, you can imagine how that would play with school management or your boss or even the students. Okay, so it's a tricky one, and certainly Teaching Unplugged, when it was published as a book in 2009, seemed to embody that paradox, because already here was a book saying don't use books, published as a book. So a little bit of a paradox there. Anyway, there is something we can learn from it. But in order to appreciate that, I think we need a tiny, tiny bit of theory. Okay? Have a look at this. Okay? It's a box. It's a room. It's a space. Now, all learning and teaching, like it or not, happens in some kind of space. It might be a virtual space, similar to what we're experiencing today, or it's a physical space. It's an actual room. It's an area where you're teaching. Okay? And in that teaching learning space, there's this. It's a triangle. Okay? The triangle is a triangle of tension. Okay? A triangle of tension. It's about the relationships that exist in the teaching learning space. Okay? Now, who is in the triangle? Well, these are two that are in the triangle to start with. Okay? It is, of course, the teacher, that's you, at the sharp end or apex of the triangle. Yeah, you're the one who really has to deliver. Most of the students look to you, particularly in more traditional contexts where it's about frontal teaching. You're the one at the front, everything's riding on you. And then obviously at this end of the triangle, you've got the students. Okay? Now, usually that relationship between teacher and student is a good one. It's two-way, and it's easy to establish because we are lovely, interpersonal, friendly, popular people. Okay? That's what we do. We get on with people. We get the best from people. That's why we're teachers. Okay? If it were that simple, but it's not. Okay? Because there is this, which is the third point of the triangle. Okay? Now, what do you think is at the third point of the triangle? What do you think is at the third point of the triangle? Try to Okay, interesting. Christina, good. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay, good. Fantastic. Yeah. Super. Lots of fantastic suggestions there. I like the director. Someone wrote the director sitting on my shoulder. Yeah, evil student, Helen. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there's always one. There's always one evil participant as well. No, so I mean, yeah. Arguably, the triangle could be a square because you could have, say, school management, and then the thing I was thinking of. But the thing I was thinking of is actually this. Oh my goodness! It's an elephant, okay? But it's the elephant in the room, okay? Now that's a phrase in English which means something that is absolutely massive, which it's difficult to sort of get round. It's difficult to deal with without addressing directly, okay? The elephant in the room. And in my case, or our case, more realistically, the elephant in the room is resources. Yeah, it's what you use to teach the language. Yeah, you're the teacher, they're the student. How do you teach the language? Well, you need to do it with something, so you need resources of some kind, and it could be a course book, it could be materials that you've created, it could be something more abstract like the curriculum or the syllabus, but whatever it is, it ain't going away, and it's something that you've got to deal with. They're often scared of or frustrated by or bored by, and it's big and it's huge and it's grey and it's mean and it's not going away. Okay, so if you're not careful, the elephant in the room can wreak havoc with your teaching. So let's personalize a bit, and I'll talk about myself. Hopefully my experience will be typical of what a lot of you have experienced, particularly teachers who have, let's say, more than 10 years teaching experience. Here we have a graph, okay, and you can see on the vertical axis is unplugged. So the further you go into this territory, the more unplugged and coursebook free you are. And on the horizontal axis, we have published resources. So the closer you stay to the horizontal, the more dependent you are on published resources, the less you like to move away from the coursebook then. Okay? Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other, I'm just saying that's a fact. Now, when I first started my teaching experience, so let's put me here, there I am, a bright sun, okay? In the first sort of 6 or 8 months, I was pretty close to the horizontal. I was coursebook dependent, newly qualified, didn't know much, used the teacher's book regularly, always looked at the answers, followed the instructions step by step, didn't want to make a mistake, okay? Not particularly autonomous, not particularly adventurous, my lessons were okay, I got a bit bored, the students got a bit bored, okay? And as my experience developed, I journeyed further into unplugged territory. I started to adapt the course book. I took photocopies, I changed things, I did what publishers don't like us to do, and everybody does, okay? And then I began maybe to design my own materials, and I produced stuff which was genuinely unplugged, maybe unpublishable because it couldn't be used easily by other people. That's the virtue of published stuff, it can. And I reached a point after about 5 years where I felt the amount of time I was putting in to design material was out of proportion compared with the amount of time I was teaching. You know, I would prepare for an hour and teach for an hour. I mean, it was a crazy situation. Okay, my lessons were dynamite, but you know, I had to calm down a bit. And as I got more experienced, I prepared my own materials less, I adapted the course book more, I did still do some of my own stuff, and then I reached a kind of compromise position after about 8 years or so, where I used the course book mostly, but I also adapted it, and I pitched in my own materials, and I tried to sort of, you know, teach well without going crazy in terms of preparation. You know, everybody has a social life, of course. So that's sort of my own experience, which I hope will mirror to some extent yours. You may find that you have stayed closer to the published line. You like course books, you trust them, you depend on them. That's great. You may find that you've sort of gone up here and you're already a published author, and you're going into territory which is, you know, unknown. You know, great for you if you are. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on. You talked about course books that were important for you, and this is the first colour course book I ever used. Okay, back in the 1980s. Does everybody recognise this one? What edition is this? Do you know? Yeah, it's a historic book. This is like a museum piece. Okay. Yeah, Hajnal, yeah, it's the first edition. You can tell a relatively unsophisticated design. Historically boring, says Sean, okay, which is fantastic to hear. I like the juxtaposition of historic and boring. Okay, monumentally boring possibly, but also monumentally dependable, I think. You know, I mean, it is an amazing book, and it kind of it set the mold, which has obviously since been broken many times. Nevertheless, you know, I soon, in a sense, fell out of love with Headway because I found it a little bit restricting for me. But what I did learn from Headway was all about, you know, how grammar is at the very center of most syllabuses. It has a kind of lockstep syllabus whereby you have to do one unit in a certain order in order for the grammar to kind of make sense and flow on in the next few units, increasing difficulty throughout the book, etc., etc. So, you know, I learned that much from Headway, and it does have a fantastic grammar reference at the back, and I really sort of brushed up my own English language grammar, you know, fresh out of teaching college. So, although it has its detractors, and Scott Thornbury and Luke Meddings are two of them, because they describe it, perhaps in a similar vein to Sean, as the concrete embodiment of Western, capitalist, neo-colonialist forms of culture. So, you know, that's getting political, okay? I don't think it's that bad. You know, any book that's into its 4th edition, you know, can't be that bad. And I'm sure we'll be saying the same thing about English File and Cutting Edge in sort of 20 years. But anyway, there we go. So that's the first book I used, and that also enabled me to adapt. I couldn't photocopy easily because it was in colour, so I was frustrated about that. But it was massively effective, yeah, as someone's just said. Okay, so that gives you a sense of sort of where I started. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to make my language a bit more reflective of what my students were actually experiencing. I sometimes felt that the language in Headway or those big course books was sort of, you know, ready-made and delivered, and it didn't kind of come from the students. It wasn't really, you know, about their world, about their lives in perhaps as much of a way as I hoped it would be. So I decided to go functional, okay? And that's one of the important things about teaching Unplugged. You know, the emphasis is a bit more on functionality. So there I was, you know, in my 20s, you know, a green student, already I ditched Headway, okay? And I decided to go into the lesson. I was teaching on a short course, the summer course, and I decided to see if I could teach a whole week without using a course book, okay? Not relying on a course book at all. I just go in and live by my wits, okay? So I came up with the mother of all lesson plans. And on Monday, I went in and I asked my students, intermediate level students, I asked them, how was your weekend? Okay? And based on their answers, we revised the past of the verb to be. We looked at a range of adjectives, you know, good, not so good, bad, awful, terrible, great, fantastic. Modifiers, quite good, rather good, better than his, you know, that sort of stuff. So that was how I sort of embarked on my coursebook-free week. Okay. And then, well, how did I continue? Well, I'll tell you how I continued. I asked another question on Tuesday. Okay. My other question on Tuesday was, what did you do at the weekend? So I stayed in the past, but this time asking a question in the past. So we looked at auxiliaries, we looked at regular past tenses, irregular past tenses. We looked at collocations, you know, I played football, I went swimming. We looked at vocabulary. You know, so that's how I sort of developed the particular shape of my coursebook-free week. Okay, and then of course on Wednesday, yeah, I had a bit of a problem on Wednesday because Wednesday is midweek. It's not the weekend, not the one that's gone and not the one to come. So of course I had a big problem. What on earth could I ask? Because the weekend was proving a big theme for me, a big topic, and it was exciting the students. So I got around it kind of craftily by asking that. So what a resourceful young teacher I was, you know, green as you like in my 20s. What's your ideal weekend? I entered the realm of the hypothetical. Okay, what's your ideal weekend? What would be your ideal weekend? So we looked at modals, okay? So it all went fine and dandy, okay? Now on Thursday, okay, well, I was spoiled for choice. What did I do on Thursday? Well, I could ask 3 questions there. I could ask questions with have got. I could ask questions with going to for the future. I could ask questions with present continuous with future value, so I could contrast the two. So my students were, you know, they were in heaven. We were looking at all sorts of things on that day, okay? Now on Friday, well, can you imagine what I did on Friday? Any ideas? Type in the chat box what I said on Friday, the moment I went into the lesson. Any ideas? Very good. Well, how was your week? That might revise, yeah, okay, that might revise the past with be. Haven't you got any plans? Crikey, it's quite a sophisticated structure, okay. It's Friday night, yeah, okay, good. Fine, okay, maybe using will tomorrow, Louise, good, okay. Is everything ready? You make it sound like a camping trip, okay, good. Okay, we can start soon, lovely, that could be, yeah, good, okay. Well, what I actually said was, I walked in and I said, have a great weekend. Okay, so we looked at imperatives and we looked at ellipsis, which is see you on Monday. Okay, now, you know, I'm not suggesting you go in and do a week of this, but you can see what I was trying to do as a young teacher. I was trying to make my lessons much more student-centered, learner-centered. I was trying to focus on functional language which arose from what they wanted to talk about. I was trying to give them the language as it sort of occurred. So I think the sort of idea behind that is certainly what inspires Unplugged teaching. And I'm going to move from this to talk more specifically about a few ideas which I hope will be instantly adaptable to your context. Okay? And here's the first one. Was it a successful lesson? It was a successful week, Sylvia, yeah. I couldn't really repeat it, but, you know, as weeks go, it was amazing. Okay, so here's my first idea, okay? And I should just say, if you want to take any of these ideas for free, steal them, please do so. You can jot them down now. You'll get them when you see the webinar again, the recording, or the link to it. But these are easy to jot down just as we go through. A grid isn't difficult, that's the point. Okay? So I had this revelation, okay, again in my sort of, you know, late 20s as a teacher, that I had a class of starter level students, you know, low level of English, very low level of English. I couldn't go in and sort of just chat. Course books, you know, okay, they're not great at that level, so I was a bit sort of stuck. And I had this idea that I would go in with this grid, with the numbers 1 to 5 along the top and letters down the other side. What kind of letters are those down the other side, and why do you think I chose to put them there? Type in the chat box. Yeah, absolutely, they're vowels. Any idea why I chose to think of the level of the students, the kind of things they find difficult? Yeah. So it's exactly, it's the pronunciation was what I was really thinking of. You know, these are key sounds, certainly when they're trying to spell things, but it's also about sort of vowel differentiation. That they're easy to mix up, as Sylvia said. They're easy to mix up. A, E, I, O, U are almost indistinguishable, you know, to some untrained ears. Okay, so I want you to go in focusing on just 5 numbers and 5 letters. Okay, and the first thing I did was I made sure that they knew these numbers and letters. So I taught them the word for cross. So cross. Okay, so I drew that on the board, a cross. And I taught them the word for tick. Tick. And I taught them the word for nothing. Nothing. Okay? And all I did was I went in and I said, I dished out copies of this, just photocopied it, you know, they could draw it in their book if they wanted to. And I said, okay, 1A tick. And they put a tick in the box 1A. And I could see what they were doing and check it easily. I didn't mind if they copied each other really, but you know. And then I said maybe 3I cross. And just to check them, to track them, I said 5U nothing, to check that nobody wrote anything, okay? And I filled in the whole grid like this, and then asked for it back, okay? And I could instantly see who was having problems with the vowels, and I could instantly see who wasn't, okay? And then what I did the next lesson is I decided to do something which was about confidence building. So I took in the same grid, and by this time, their numbers and their letters were a bit better, okay? Or at least their vowels. And I said, okay, write 10 English words in your grid. Any square. 10, okay? And even starter level students know 10 words in English. They know international words like pizza, football, bus, school, maybe, you know, basic level words like that, pen, maybe, okay? But what we had instantly was each student had put down 10 words, and if you combined all the words of the whole class, we had about 50 words in English, which they knew already, and they could see they knew already. And I took in the grids, and I put all the words on a huge poster, the words we know, our word library, and already these starter level students could see that they knew something in English. And they also learned the other words on the poster, they learned the meaning from other students, and already increased their vocabulary. And it gave me a really clear snapshot of what exactly they knew. And you can try this with all sorts of levels of students. If you ask, you know, intermediate level students, and you tell them, instead of writing 10 words in English, write 10 important words in English, or 10 interesting words in English, or 10 adverbs in English, that kind of thing. You can really sort of pool the resources of the class. And you can also make it into a game, because I then dished out the completed grids again, back to the original students, and they played a game in pairs, where each student would say A3, and the other student would say school, S-C-H-O-O-L, and spell it for the other student, who, if they had a blank, would write it down. Or they would say nothing, or they would spell a different word. So they were immediately practicing their letters and their spelling in a fun kind of way, with words that they felt were important to them. Okay? And you can develop this in all sorts of multiple ways. For example, you could ask your students to write down 2 names or proper nouns, so Susanna and Giovanni. They write down 2 verbs, live and work. They write down 2 adverbs. They write down 2 adjectives. And you begin to work on basic sentence construction. Okay? And it doesn't have to be with a low-level group. It could be with a high-level group. But you work on basic sentence construction. So you do a subject, verb, object, sentence construction, okay, with words that they'd chosen. And you develop dialogues, and you develop little sort of sentences, sentence correction, that kind of thing, okay? Obviously, you need to make sure that you really drill the correct pronunciation of the vowels. That's fundamental for how this game works, how this activity works. Okay, so that's one idea. That was a sort of breakthrough activity that I did when I was trying to teach Unplugged. Okay, and here's another one. Have a look at this. This is even simpler. Okay, this activity is called Mind Reader, and it's great for introducing topics. Cultural topics possibly, but great for introducing all sorts of things. It's a fun way of introducing it. And what happens is that you tell your students, I am thinking of something. I'm thinking of something. And they have 5 opportunities to guess what you are thinking of. Okay? And it's the same thing you're thinking of all the way through. And you give them 5 clues. Okay, now I think the best way to experience this is to experience it. Okay, so let's play it. Okay, right. Here's clue number 1. I'm thinking of a town. Write in the chat box what town you think I'm thinking of. Any town. Take a guess. Thanks, Garcia. Good. Right, Scunthorpe. Interesting. Okay, fantastic. So, Timbuktu, yeah, which I've never been to, straight enough. Okay, Ukraine, I thought that was a country. Okay, so immediately you can see that your students probably don't know the meaning or don't appreciate the meaning between city and town. Obviously, Glasgow's a city, London's a city, etc., etc. I'm thinking of a town. Okay, so it's smaller than a city. Okay, right. So here's clue number 2. So it doesn't matter that you've all made a mistake. It's not a problem at all. That's part of the fun. Again, it indicates to me what you know. And it also, if you choose a city or a town, it indicates, you know, what's mappable in the room. Okay? If you've got a monolingual class, you get a really good impression of what places are important for them. Okay? So here's clue number 2. It's a British town. Okay? Write in the chat box what you think it is for clue number 2. It's the same thing I'm thinking of the whole time. Kent is a county. Okay. Scunthorpe again. No. Okay. Okay. So you're getting closer. Yeah. Still a few cities in there. Brighton's a city. Okay. We're gonna have to work on that concept. Okay. Okay. Yeah. You're not bad. Not bad. We're getting there. Yeah. You're getting closer. Yeah. I think Stratford's a city as well. Anyway. Here we go. Here's clue number 3. It's a British university town. It's a British university town. Big university there. Okay, so some of you think Oxford's a town and a city. And Cambridge, okay. I haven't seen the correct answer yet, which is funny, because usually clue number 3 is always a good point to stop and ask students to compare. And they can compare with their partner, okay? And they maybe see someone's idea and they steal it, and that's okay, because they have a better idea. And also at clue number 3, you can ask anybody to take a guess. And if you're the kind of person who likes to, kind of teacher, who likes to challenge your students, you can ask them to bet. You can say, okay, do you bet that you know the answer at clue number 3? If you do, you win. You can leave the class 2 minutes early, okay? Something like that, some sort of reward. And there's always one person who knows it at clue number 3, but sometimes they haven't got the courage to bet. Okay? So after they've compared at clue number 3, you then continue with your clues. So you say, it's a British university town famous for golf. What do you think it is? There's your clue number 4. It's a British university town famous for golf. It's been in the news just last week. A very big golf tournament happened there. Any idea? No golf fans out there? Okay, I'll give you clue number 5. It's a British university town famous for golf and famous also as the meeting place of Prince William and Kate Middleton. They met there. Any idea? Yeah, Helena's got it. Yeah, Helen Jagger's got it. Aldona's got it. Yeah, yeah. It's St Andrews in Scotland, Fife. Yeah, St Andrews, which is famous for golf. Big golf tournament last week there. Okay, Christina, apologies. Yeah, same one you wrote before. Okay. Yes, the activity is very culturally bound, but you can change it to absolutely anything. So you could say to your students, for example, if you've got a group of teen students, okay, what am I thinking of? Number 1, it's a man. Number 2, it's a young man. Number 3, it's a young American man. Number 4, it's a young American male singer. It's a young American male singer whose first name is Justin. Okay, so it's a good way of sort of presenting anything. You can talk about places, you can talk about people, you can talk about things. Justin Bieber, actually, because Justin Timberlake is a very good guess. He's a little bit older, out of the target demographic. Okay, Justin Bieber is Canadian. Yes, good point. Naturalized American, I think. Anyway, let's not fall out over it. Well done. Very good. Gosh, you're on the ball. You know your students. Okay. So, you know, obviously you can choose a whole range of sort of, you know, people. But the important thing is that you can get your students to write clues. So they could choose a person or a place or a thing and write clues about it. Okay. In terms of actual language that's produced, a fair bit of it comes from the teacher. But the most interesting point is to ask students to justify their choice. Okay. So the moment somebody says, you know, Glasgow or Bristol, you ask why, and the bare minimum is that they say, well, it's a British town, or it's a British town I know, it's a British town I visited, something like that. So you're not asking the students to produce much at this point, but the important thing is to ask them to justify their choices or justify them to their partner at point 3. So that's the kind of language that's produced, okay? And the way you can develop it is to get them to write clues. So that's much more learner-centered. And you start off the lesson with something like this, which introduces a topic. Okay? So that's another way of making it a bit more unplugged, a bit more learner-centered. Okay, let's move on. So here's another one. Okay, and this is called target. And you'll see there's a sort of pattern developing with these kind of activities. Most of them are sort of grids. They're empty. There isn't much on the page. It's easy to do. You could just get your students to do it in a book or on a whiteboard. Okay. Here we've got 4 concentric circles labeled A to D and the numbers 1 to 8 underneath. Okay. And this is a great activity for doing something like assessing what's important for students. Okay. So, for example, you could say, okay, write the names of 8 friends under the target. And they write the names of 8 friends. Okay? And then you say, now position the friends on the target according to maybe how close they are to you, how much you like them, how similar they are to you. Okay? The last one is very interesting, how similar they are to you, because some people we like as friends aren't necessarily similar to us. Okay? So perhaps students put, you know, one name in A, and then they get them to sort of justify their choices. You can do pair work here and combine. Okay? So that's one thing you can do with this. You could also give your students 8 jobs, and asks them to, first of all, you dictate the 8 jobs. So something like waitress or waiter, bank manager, office worker, policeman, etc., etc., doctor, regular jobs, and then ask your students to position them on the target according to which jobs they would most like to do. So that would be close to A, or which jobs they think are the most important. So why is a doctor more important than a teacher, for example? And again, you're asking them to justify their choices. Okay? You could get them to write 8 jobs. You don't even need to give them. Get them to write 8 jobs of people they know. Okay? And get them to sort of discuss which ones they think are the most important, or the ones they would most like to do. You could even, if you've got higher level students, give them 8 jobs which aren't quite jobs, and you could get them to discuss which one is perhaps the most, which one would they consider to be proper jobs. So for example, if you said something like student, housewife, criminal, priest, king, landlord, soldier, prostitute. I'm not suggesting you say that, but you might want to if you think you could deal with that with your students. And they would position them according to sort of where they're, how they feel about these things. The important thing is that they are the ones who have the decision making. So they put soldier in the center because they think it's a proper job with a place of work and maybe a salary, and all sorts of vocabulary would just come out of this. And they'd be desperate to discuss it, okay, to justify their choices. So that's just one example. And there's all sorts of ways you could adapt this target game as well. Okay, let's move on and have a look at another one. Again, a quick and easy one. So here we've got, what are these? Just type in the chat box. Yeah, absolutely. Postal stamps, postage stamps, yeah. And you could also have banknotes, okay? The important thing is that there are 3 or 4 of different value, okay? So banknotes or postage stamps. And you can see here the values are 100 through to 40, with 100 being the highest denomination, okay? And what you do here is this is kind of project work with your students, okay? And you would get your students, you'd think of the topic area that you wanted maybe to look at, or your students wanted to look at, and you get them to choose a group of possibilities and then prioritize them by putting them in the stamps. So for example, if you're looking at famous historical people from their country, you could get them to choose maybe 6 important historical figures, and then they have to prioritize and choose 4 and put each person in a different stamp according to how important they think they are. Okay? And they don't need to draw a picture, they can write their name, but they could always, cut a magazine photo out of, something off the internet. Yeah, okay. Again, the important thing is that they justify their choices to each other in the group, but also at some point in a mini presentation to the class. So they're saying, okay, in our 100 stamp, we have X, Y, Z, because. And they might even need to introduce the figures if other people don't know them. And you could choose places, you could choose national monuments, you could choose books, important books, you could choose all sorts of things, okay? You could make it abstract if you wanted to. And again, it doesn't need to be stamps, it could be notes. And you can pitch in interesting ideas. So for example, if your students say that the person or place in the 100 stamp is the most important, then you can challenge them by saying, well, 40 is actually the most popular stamp, the most common, the one people see most often. Shouldn't you be putting the most important person in 40? That kind of thing. Turn it on its head, okay? Because I don't know about you, but certainly when it comes to notes, I only know the people on the back of the low denomination notes. I don't know the ones on the back of the £50 note anymore, okay? I don't see that kind of money. Okay, so that's a way to prioritize, it's a way to initiate project work. Again, it would all come from the student, and it's about justifying choices, and it's about explaining choices. Okay, here's another quick idea. This one's slightly different. What have we got here? They're definitely not stamps, are they? What are they? What are these things? Absolutely, yeah. So they are receipts. And if you know your shops in the UK, they're receipts from a particular kind of shop. Anybody been to the UK? Some of you will live in the UK, so you'll know. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, it's a supermarket, okay? Quite a sort of nice supermarket, actually, you know, in terms of the kind of stuff it carries. It's quite sort of international. So now, if you look closely at these receipts, yes, posh. Yes, it's posh. Thank you, Jill. Yeah, I'm posh. Well, I had posh aspirations once in a while. Okay, so no, but this was actually when I was teaching in Brighton. Okay, and this is a lovely idea which you can really use with your students, you know, tomorrow. And what you do is you ask your students to go out and find as many receipts as they can from a supermarket. Okay, and they're not difficult to find. They're everywhere. So they're in the rubbish bin outside the supermarket, they're on the floor, they're in the trolleys, they're in the shopping bags, they're discarded. They're not difficult to find. Unfortunately, people leave them behind. They leave behind this data. Okay. So I asked my students to go out and get as many receipts as they could, and they came back with about 30. Okay. And I looked at them, and we narrowed it down and chose 3, which we felt were quite different. Okay. And then what we did is we decided to become detectives, okay? And yeah, they can bring their own receipts as well, sure, if they're prepared to share the data, yeah. But it's kind of easy if it's anonymous on this one. And so we looked at the information, okay? Now, if you look at the first receipt, okay, you can see that it's maybe not so clear, but the time of the purchase is 10:24 on a Thursday, okay? So I asked my students what kind of person this was, and immediately all the students said unemployed. This person is unemployed, okay? Because it's 10:30 on a Thursday morning, so they're not at work, so they must be unemployed, okay? So that's an interesting assumption on the part of students. So I was able to talk to them about, you know, well, maybe they work part-time, they have a part-time job. Maybe they work flexi-time. Maybe it's their day off. Maybe they're retired. Okay, something like that. So, and then the next thing you look at, obviously, is you look at exactly what they purchased. And in the case of this receipt, it's tea bags, baked beans, sliced bread, medium eggs, and dry sherry. Okay. So I asked my students to sort of imagine what kind of person that was. And we talked about, you know, the cultural. Yeah, thank you, Christina. Yeah, we talked about the cultural implications of this, and came up with the idea that this is probably someone who's maybe more mature, not to say old, wants to cook easy food, yeah, a retiree. If they like dry sherry, then that suggests a certain kind of generation. Not many young people drink dry sherry. And what we began to do was to construct a person, a real person. Okay, interesting you say elderly woman, Christina. Why a woman? Okay, out making trifle. Okay, so you know it's absolutely fantastic. Students are mad keen on this kind of thing. When you create the biodata of someone, you can create their background. You can ask them to speculate, you know, where they were born, where they grew up, where they went to school, what their job is. Okay, you can ask them to. If you've got receipts which are not in English, you can always translate them. Okay, that's not a problem. You do your vocabulary work first. Okay, so translate them all into English, and then you can still begin to speculate. That's also great for generating vocab. Some of them are maybe untranslatable, which is interesting. Okay, and then moving on to this receipt, you know, my students quite quickly sussed out that this person was possibly a foreign student, buying international beer, buying a certain cheese for fondue. Okay, yeah, they could translate them for homework for sure. Okay. And in terms of the time of the purchase, it was at a time of day when maybe students are out and about, okay? And again, for the third person, my students quite quickly realized, well, this is probably a mum or a dad, a mum who is making a birthday cake, because there are all the ingredients there for a birthday cake. So they got to know these people. They gave them names, they gave them backgrounds, they also gave them, you know, as well as backstories, they gave them front stories. So what happened to them from this point? Did they have a good party? Did they, what did they do that evening? Later that month, that year? Where are they now? Are they still alive? Are they not? You know, so it creates all sorts of kind of suspense and interest and drama, and it all comes from the students, okay? Because they just find this simple resource, and you won't find this kind of thing in a course book, okay? Good. So moving on. Now, unplugged ideas don't necessarily have to be for use in the classroom. In terms of how you could justify it against your text-type curriculum, just use it as an unplugged moment. Use it as a little activity to sort of get them going. If they're talking about food, you can generate lots of vocab connected to food. Okay. You can also talk, you know, if your topic is lifestyle or daily routines or kinds of shops. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff you could, you know, use to justify it. Okay. But this activity we've got here is self-study. So it doesn't have to happen in the classroom. Okay. And this is called WOW. Okay. So this is word of the week. So this is a simple worksheet. Again, it's empty. And you give it to your students to fill in at the end of the week. Okay? And they choose one word and fill it in. And you decide the criteria. So it could be a difficult word. It could be a useful word, an interesting word, a new word, an old word, a polysyllabic word, a monosyllabic word. Okay, it's absolutely up to you. Okay? Or it could be up to them. You could just say, okay, word of the week, look back in your notes, away you go. Okay? And then when they come back to class, often what they bring is something like this. And this is an example from an Italian student. Okay? And the word they've chosen is celebration. Okay? And they've got their example there, which is festeggiamento, excuse my pronunciation. And you can see, interestingly, that they've also translated it as celebrazione, and then they've crossed that out. Okay, so maybe that's because it's a false friend. I think celebrazione means more like performance or something like that, or show in Italian. But anyway, and they've got word forms here. They've got a noun, a verb, and an adjective. I'm not sure they could probably use that. They might need to know that the pronunciation changes to celebratory, but anyway. They've got their own definition, which is a bit basic, but you know, it's not bad. It's their own definition, like a party, usually big or formal, question mark. And then they've got the dictionary definition to back it up. They've got an example sentence of their own, which uses big celebration, which is a nice collocation, and they've recycled big from here, obviously. Okay. And here's an example sentence that they've got from a text, so anywhere. So it could be a text they've read, it could be online, they've maybe just Googled the word celebration and found that. It's not a problem because they're looking at the language in action, okay? And here they've got a phrase that they've put down. They've heard that phrase from somewhere. That calls for a celebration, which is lovely, okay? And so plenty of work this student has done, and all I gave them was an empty sheet of paper, a framework. And what I do with this kind of thing, with this word of the week, is I get students to vote on the best word of the week. I get students to make a mini presentation. Okay? Some students, of course, wouldn't do it, but if some did, they would feel that they were gaining. The ones who didn't do it would feel like they're losing out. Okay? You don't have to use the translation. You can obscure that. You can put a different block in. You can put pronunciation over there. You know, you can change these, make them fewer. You know, that kind of thing. Not a problem. The important thing is that they're investing in this word. It's special for them, and they're going to talk about it. Okay? And you could have you could have a vote for a WOM, word of the month. You could have a WHAT, word of the term, or WAS, word of the season, WOI, word of the year. You know, all sorts of fun with this. Okay? WOD, word of the day. Okay, so you know you can have a lot of fun with this, and it's just about students investing in something which which they've done. Okay, so that's an unplugged idea for self-study. Okay, good. So let's move on to look at the power of the infographic. Okay, now this again is another easy way to have an unplugged moment in your lesson. Okay, our course books these days are full of photos, which look great, give an aspirational kind of lifestyle, but don't often give that much information. Whereas online, there are so many infographics. I mean, students go crazy for them. And all you need to do to find them is just go into Google, type infographic, and then the topic of whatever it is you're looking at that week, that day. So you could have infographic holidays, infographic sport, infographic dogs, infographic love, infographic weather, and all sorts of things come up. And the infographics to choose are the ones which just have a minimum amount of written text, if you can, because then you're not compelling your students to read something with lots of difficult vocab. And this is what I found, which is How Wet is Britain? Okay. And it's amazing because there's all sorts of language you can revise from this. You can present language from this. I mean, the thing that jumps out, obviously, as experienced language teachers, is we think, okay, great, comparatives, superlatives. So not as wet as, wetter than, a lot wetter than, a bit wetter than, a bit drier than, there is more rain in X than Y, etc., etc. Okay, but the fundamental thing as well is that this is interesting stuff. I mean, if you look at London, which I think of as quite a wet place, it's actually drier than Milan, which is in Italy, which I think of as hot, and it's drier than Rome, which is also in Italy. So there's all sorts of kind of interesting things that you can really sort of exploit with an infographic. Okay, and here's an example of an infographic I found just recently. Now, can you imagine what this infographic is about? I've deleted the title. What do you think it is? Yeah, Bonnie. Yeah, it's careers or aspirations or jobs. Yeah, it's actually what career paths people take. So what career paths people take by percentage. So most people's jobs can be grouped according to a sector. And our jobs, teacher, we are 5% of the population, which is not quite as much as I thought, actually. Okay, it's the same as technician. So there are as many teachers as there are technicians, and there are as many teachers as there are generals. So soldiers, if you like. So these are career types. Okay, so here's an interesting infographic. The most popular career path is administrator. Okay, which is a very sort of nebulous one. Entertainer is also incredibly popular. So seller, 13%, people who work in sales. Okay, so there's all sorts of things you could sort of exploit with this. But if you find a really exciting infographic and you're not quite sure what to do with it, remember this: something. So if you don't ask any questions, just ask these three. What does it show? That's the sop of something. What does it mean? That's the myth of something. What do you think? That's the thing of something. Okay? And some of you will recognize that as a sort of by-else model. Yeah, it's describe it, then what does it mean, then what do you think? Okay, so describe it, what does that suggest, what are the main trends maybe? Okay, and then final one, which is the most important probably, is the critical thinking, which is what do you think, what's your response? If you only ask 3 questions about an infographic, ask that. Okay, so students absolutely love them. Okay, good. Moving towards a close here. Okay, I mentioned at the start the idea of favorite course books, our Desert Island course book, and how they've become more multimodal. So you're encouraged these days to use all the digital resources that come with a course book. Okay, but don't forget, in terms of published resources, if something is published online, it's also published. And a good way to get technology into your lessons is by focusing on digital-only resources. Okay? So I think often a lot of us sort of try to kind of adapt the course book to a digital age. So we maybe use iTools, or we use online activities connected with the book, you know, which is really sort of using the book in another way. I mean, the fun thing about digital-only resources is that they are completely different, okay? And here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 resources which I use on a fairly regular basis and which are worth investigating, okay? Memrise is great for students to learn vocabulary. They can design their own flashcards, really fantastic for learning vocab. Quizlet is great for teachers to design their own tests. Okay, students can do that too. SpritzInk is really good for helping students increase their reading speed. Okay, they're all free, they're all accessible. Okay, English Grammar does exactly what it says on the tin. For those grammar fiends among your students who can't get enough, who read Raymond Murphy at night by their bed, English Grammar's got masses and masses of this stuff. Learning English, fantastically reliable, BBC resource, hard to fault. Okay. Dave's ESL Cafe, very well known. Most of you probably know it already. No harm in mentioning it though. A little bit chaotic in terms of design, but you know, really good resource. And Busy Teacher, which is fantastic. It's like a huge international staff room. And it's something you can go into, find a lesson idea and leave. You go in, exchange ideas. It's a massive resource because the funny thing about teaching, as you know, is when we go into the classroom, it's just us and them. Well, and the elephant, of course, but it's just us and them. We're on our own. In a funny kind of way, as a teacher, you can be quite isolated from your colleagues. Okay? But Busy Teacher is a wonderful online resource for getting ready-made lessons, you know, really, really good. And I can see some of you know it already. Kim's saying it's really good. Elena's saying she likes it. You know, and there are lots and lots of others, One Stop English, etc., etc. But if you are going to go digital in your lessons, try to go digital only for a change and see how that feels. It feels quite different. And in that sense, you know, that's unplugged but not unplugged. Okay? Good. Okay, so in terms of wrapping up, here is a sort of summary for you. Okay? So, in coming up with a kind of summary, what I've really come up with, I think, is sort of 5 golden rules. And the first one is lean on published resources. Don't prop yourself up on them. It's okay to use a course book. I did, I do, you do. Don't feel you have to unplug your teaching. Okay? The good thing about a plug is that you can take it out and put it back in. So lean on published resources. That's what they're there for. They're good for a reason. But if you're looking to make your teaching more learner-centered, intersperse your teaching with unplugged moments. So I'm not suggesting unplug your teaching totally, all lesson, every day, every week from here on in. It's impossible, okay? But don't neglect those little unplugged moments, those opportunities where you can give them something blank, something empty, okay? How do you do it? Well, you use a variety of empty, small-scale or local stimuli to introduce different activities. Okay, keep it empty, keep it easy, keep it quick. Okay. What does this do? Well, hopefully it sustains your teaching journey and their learning journey by making the teacher learning space more learner-centered. Yeah. Part of the problem, I think, with teaching, the reason why we get so tired and so jaded and so bored, is that it's all about us, and it should be all about them. The more we allow them to take control, the more we unplug our teaching every now and again, often the better it is, the easier it is. It gives us a break, okay? And the final point is something that Charles Darwin probably said, which is adapt, adapt, adapt. And by that I mean adapt the course book. You know, don't be afraid of attacking it. Publishers expect you to. Adapt the course book. Adapt how you teach. Adapt your own materials. Adapt what students give you, okay? So all sorts of good stuff can arise if you keep adapting. Good. Okay, so there's a sort of summary, and, well, that just about wraps it up for today. Thank you very much for taking part. I hope there were some useful ideas which you can use in your next lesson, be it tomorrow or September if you've already broken up for the summer. And if you stay online in the room now, Kate will be coming back in and will give you the final few messages before the afternoon, which is your own. Thank you so much. All the best. Bye-bye.
Andrew, thank you so much. That was a fantastic webinar, and similar to this morning, just lots of really positive comments coming through, lots of interaction, and lots of ideas being shared between different people. I think that that everybody has managed to take something away from this and has learnt about that sort of unplugged versus resource books. And yeah, I can just see from the comments and the thank yous and the positive feedback coming through that it was really well received. So well done, and thank you so much for your time today. Just looking at the slide that's on the screen, I hope that you enjoyed the webinar. I get the impression that most of you did. And if you are interested in any future webinars, there's a link there that just tells you what webinars are coming up. You will be sent a follow-up email from this webinar asking you for your feedback, and it would be really great if you could please put all of these comments, all these wonderful things that you have to say about today's webinar into that feedback form, because we do feed that information back to our presenters, and it's important for them to know how they're being received, and also important for OUP to know that we're delivering the sort of webinars that you can take something away from and learn from. So please do fill in your feedback form. You will also be sent a link to the recording of this webinar, so if you arrive late or if there's anything you missed, please don't panic, because you'll be able to watch it back. You will also be able to access, I think, the slides, or there will be a summary handout from today's webinar, which will be sent through to you in that feedback email, and also a certificate of attendance. So if for any reason you don't receive that email, I'm just going to pop an email address in here, elt.events@oup.com. There we go, elt.events@oup.com. And if you just ping them an email, then they'll be able to send you a reply just letting you know what's happened to that. But hopefully that should all go through okay. So just to show you how to exit the room, if you just go to the help and then leave session at the bottom there, that's how you can leave today's session. I think also just closing the window down works just as well. And for those of you who are on mobile devices, this is how you need to exit the room. But once again, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everybody who's participated today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas and for engaging with Andrew's presentation. And one last time, a massive thank you to Andrew for delivering such a great webinar and taking the time to go through all of that very comprehensively with us today. I think he's shared some really great ideas, and yeah, I was very impressed myself. So thank you, everybody. I wish you a very good day or evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and hope to see you in another OUP webinar soon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.